Let's get some business news now. Singapore has been ranked the world's most competitive economy this year, according to a survey conducted by academic institute IMD. It leapfrogged to pole position from fourth place last year. Now, over 6,000 business leaders rated Singapore the most competitive globally out of 67 economies, a feat it had last achieved back in 2020. Now, Switzerland, as you can see there, in second place, Denmark in third. They cited three top factors: business efficiency in the form of a strong labour market, good attitudes and values locally, and technological infrastructure. Undergirding it all, political stability, of course, and predictability. What's turning investors away, though, are high operating costs, from escalating office rents and prices for consumers to increased electricity costs for industrial clients. For this year, Singapore's business competitiveness could also be hit by a multitude of other factors, such as navigating challenges arising from geopolitical tensions, overcoming resource constraints, as well as managing disruptions from new technologies. Well, to help us understand why this ranking matters at all to Singapore, we have Professor Arturo Bris. He leads the World Competitiveness Ranking at IMD, joining us from Zurich. Welcome to the show, sir. Now, it's quite a jump for Singapore to get from fourth place to third. What has it done better this time?
Singapore has a perfect model for competitiveness, in our opinion. It combines a very clear economic strategy with good institutions, good infrastructure, and talent attractiveness. This year, the country has climbed to the first position because even though it took a little bit longer than the rest of the successful economies, particularly in the West, to recover from COVID, it has done at a much faster speed. And that's why it has actually surpassed Denmark and Switzerland that used to be in the top positions last year.
Yeah, I should say we've jumped to first, up 3 positions rather. Now, the next question, what are some of the specific initiatives or policy priorities that you feel have helped Singapore improve in its rankings?
Overall, what is very important for a country, and Singapore is a good example of that, is to have a clear collaboration between the public and the private sector. Specifically, I think that countries need to have policies that are conducive to business creation, entrepreneurship, innovation, and ultimately the creation of jobs. Singapore has been doing that as one of the national priorities. But from the perspective of the private sector, it's also important, number one, that the private sector invests, that it creates productive jobs and highly paid jobs, and that actually it takes advantage of the talent pool in the country and develops talent to make sure that people are productive at the same time. And that's also something that the private sector in Singapore has been doing extremely well.
Yeah, one thing perhaps that was noted as perhaps being a negative would be competitiveness in terms of high prices across the board. But should Singapore be competing on cheaper prices and rents? Can it even do that?
Unfortunately, nothing can be totally perfect. But I must say that if you look at the top 5 countries in our ranking, they all tend to be expensive countries.
Yeah.
And that's the price to pay to be successful. Obviously, if you attract investors, if you attract talent, if you attract companies, then this pushes demand and then prices increase. Switzerland is a very expensive country, probably more expensive than Singapore. Denmark is an expensive country. And in any of the countries that we see on the top, Hong Kong or the Netherlands, we see that prices have increased. So I would never suggest that Singapore needs to work on lowering prices to be more competitive, because probably it's the most natural cost of being competitive.
Yeah. You know, it's always nice to be number one, but how will these rankings affect the way investors choose to do business here? Will it change the way they decide where to put their money? And will it even translate into any tangible benefits for the countries that have won it in the past?
Yes. In Singapore, I always get this question, and we go back to 2020 when the country was number one. And everyone was asking me, how can we maintain the top position? And I think that that ambition is something that has also pushed Singapore back on the top once again. But to answer your question, we see very tangibly that improvements in our competitiveness ranking are accompanied in the longer term with more capital attraction and more investment into the country, but also with a significant improvement of the country abroad, which basically leads to the same outcome, which is that the country is able to create and attract more companies and is able to attract more investment and develop the country's infrastructure. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, but you have seen that happen in many previous examples of countries that have increased their ranking significantly, not necessarily due to the number one position. I'm thinking, for example, of countries like Estonia, Saudi Arabia, Switzerland itself, that used to be on the 30th position in the ranking many years ago. So it is definitely one of the key objectives of policy to be competitive, because it helps develop the economy forward.
Professor Bris, always nice to talk to you about good news. Professor Arturo Bris, the Director, IMD World Competitiveness Center, speaking to us from Zurich.